Okay, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangout. My name is John Mueller. I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst here at Google in Switzerland, and part of what I do is talk with webmasters, publishers like all of you, and try to answer any questions you might have around search, around your websites, those kind of problems. I see we have some newish faces here in the Hangout at the moment. Is there something that's on your mind that you'd like to start off with, a question maybe?
Hi.
Hi, go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, John. Thank you. Right, yeah, I've got a question. We've received quite recently, well, for the last 3 months, a message from Google Webmaster Tools, or the Search Console, should I say, that we've got too many URLs, basically. We've got an e-commerce website with lots of dynamic links generated from faceting. But we tend to control all those links. It's a message we had a long time ago. We've been blocking most of those URLs through robots, no index, no follow, or through the robots TXT, we've been blocking them as well. And we also configured the Webmaster tool to block those URLs. Now, we've received these emails again, these messages. I'm checking the examples URLs of those messages, and none of those pages are do index. Basically, they're all no index, no follow. What should I do?
Okay, so this message comes before we actually check those pages. So essentially, when we crawl your website, we discover all of these new URLs, and we don't really know what is on those URLs yet. So this is usually a sign that something within your website, you're generating all of these URLs, and that's kind of making it harder for us to understand which URLs we actually should be crawling. So especially if they have a robots no index on them, we have to crawl those URLs before we can see the no index.
Well, I understand that. But let's say if it's a one which is blocked through robots TXT, you shouldn't even get to that page. You should be blocked before.
Theoretically, we should notice that and not flag those, yeah.
Okay.
So if you want, you can send me the link, maybe drop it in the chat here, and I can pick it up afterwards and kind of double check our triggering on there. I know this is a bit of a misleading message sometimes, in the sense that maybe you're doing all the right things, but it's still showing up. From our point of view, it's really something where we discover a lot of these new URLs on a website when we crawl it, and this is a kind of a situation where, oh, it looks like something completely broke on the server, or maybe there's a type of navigation within the website that generates infinite URL variations, and those are the kind of situations we want to alert the webmasters about. But maybe you're doing everything right already, and we should have recognized that better.
Okay, one more thing. I was thinking to, it's an implementation on our site, to put a rel no follow on the links themselves.
That can help, yeah.
That would help us. Okay. And what is the danger of these messages with respect to Panda?
These messages are purely technical. So this is purely a technical issue on your website. It has nothing to do with how our quality algorithms would view your websites.
Okay.
Purely with crawling.
Okay, got frightened there. Thank you.
All right, more questions from those who are kind of new to these Hangouts. What can I help you with? Nothing special? Okay. We have a bunch of, yeah.
Can you hear me, John?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I've been watching the Hangouts for a while. I work for a company called Columbus Direct, and we were hit with a penguin penalty back in 2012. The website has been doing some pretty aggressive link building tactics for the 10 years preceding that, with good success, and we've spent the last 3 years really trying to remove links, disavow, and so the penalty, we got the notification that the penalty was removed more than 18 months ago, but our rankings haven't recovered, and so I was just wondering whether you could give us any tips on how we can move this forward.
That's always hard because you almost have to take a look at the individual situation of the site there. So that's the .com version, or do you have different versions?
We have different versions, but it's the .com version that is the main for the UK market, and that's kind of where the marketing effort was focused.
Mm-hmm. So I think if you had unnatural links, for example, on your website, and that was a problem, and maybe there was even a manual action there, then that's something that can still kind of linger from an algorithmic point of view, in that our algorithms are still kind of worried a bit about those unnatural links. So I think that's probably what you're seeing there. So
we've engaged like a number of agencies to remove links and to build out the Disavow file, which has now turned into a kind of a mammoth thing, and we're not sure if we've got any natural links left, almost. And certainly we're a very large player in the UK travel insurance market, but not next to the people that are dominating the front pages in today's results. It's the aggregators, of course, and some of the bigger insurance players. And I was wondering whether we would ever make it back, whether we should continue to pay people to remove links, whether we should be looking at focusing in other areas, or what you would suggest.
I think this is always a tricky situation, because you don't really know exactly what you might be doing there that would help your site in the long run, or that would help in the short run. I think, in general, if you've worked hard to clean up all of these bad links, to put them in a disavow, to remove the ones that you can, then that's probably the right step there. And moving forward, I just continue focusing on your website to make that like the absolute best. So instead of focusing too much on links now, I try to find a point where you can say, well, I've cleaned these up as much as we can. There might be still some small ones back and forth, but
because we'd put so much work into cleaning them up, and there was manual re-inclusion, because it was a manual action that we were notified about unnatural links. I think from the business's point of view, when we had the message saying that the manual action has been removed, but sort of 18 months later, we're still in this kind of penalized position. So I wonder whether we've been penalized by algorithmic factors as well, and how we could kind of identify what the problem that's still on the,
Yeah. So in a situation like this, it's certainly possible that some of our web spam algorithms are still picking up issues there, or were picking them up when they were last updated. So that's kind of a situation where I just try to find a point where you can say, well, I've cleaned up all of these web spam issues, these problematic links, as much as possible.
Yeah.
And just from here on, I just want to focus on making the website better, to really kind of build up the natural strength that's otherwise existing within the website. So instead of focusing on things that are like so far behind you that you've already definitely cleaned up, I'd really just focus on the future.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, I think there was one question in the chat. On a .com domain with English and German content, will the German content benefit from English links and vice versa? Yes, of course. If this is one website and you have different kinds of content and some kinds of links, then that's something where, generally speaking, the website itself will kind of grow in value over time as you gain links, as you gain popularity, those kind of things. And the main thing I'd watch out for there is really making sure that you put these German and English content on separate URLs, so that you don't have one URL with both German and English, maybe side by side, but really separate URLs for each language.
John, small follow-up on that. What if you have CCTLD, so like a Romanian website, and you get links from international English-based website. Would those have a lesser effect than usual, or would they be ignored? For example, some people wrote about something I did, but in English, and they say, look, the Romanian version is over there, but it's in English, it's from an English website. Would that...
I don't see a problem with that. I think that's perfectly fine. That's not something you'd need to kind of artificially channel to an English version of a page or something. I think that's perfectly fine. That kind of situation happens all the time. You also have that between different versions of your own website. So if you have an English version of the content and a Romanian version, you'll probably have a link back and forth saying this is the English version, this is the Romanian version. And that's perfectly fine.
Right, but in that situation, you kind of know, especially if you have hreflang, that, okay, so this is the same entity, just a different version of it, rather than an external site. I was just curious if it's just less effect if it's coming from a different language, for example, because the users that see that link might be, well, I don't know that language, so it's not as important.
No, I think we treat that just the same. The main difference, I guess, there is that the anchor text might be different. So if we see a lot of anchor text going to one page with specific text, then we might assume that page is about that text. And if that text is the wrong language, then that might make it hard for us to figure out, okay, which of these pages should we rank for this English query? Should we rank this Romanian page, or should we rank an English page that we might have that kind of confirms that on the page?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Can I touch base on Dan's question?
Sure.
Okay. I know that part of his problem might be that the links that he removed are what was helping him rank. So that might be part of the reason why he's not ranking, or getting back to where he was. But my main question is you said that a lot of times after you revoke a manual review, the algorithm will still be kind of itchy on that URL. How long does something like that last?
Sorry, I didn't understand the last part.
Oh, I was just saying, you also said that at times after a manual review is removed, the algorithm will still be touchy on the actual domain because it's like, hey, this was a manual penalized site. How long will something like that take for it to kind of be like, okay, it's cool?
It really depends on what all happened there. So I guess the main difference when it comes to manual actions and algorithmic changes is that for manual actions, we really focus on the links that you have visible in Webmaster Tools or in Search Console. And if you clean those up, then from a manual action point of view, we'll probably say that's good. You've done a good job cleaning this up, and we'll resolve that. And from an algorithmic point of view, we take a look at everything that we found, which might include some things that aren't directly visible in Search Console. So that's something where if you have a few small things that just aren't shown because they kind of don't match that threshold that we use for Search Console, then that's fine. But if there's this giant mass of links out there that are just way below this threshold in Search Console, then those can also add up. And that can be something that the algorithms kind of respond to because they see, well, it's not that they're individual links that are really visible that we should show in Search Console, but there's this giant mass of kind of these small things that are hidden around the web with paid links or whatever they are. So that's kind of the difference there in how the algorithms see things compared to how manual actions, how the web spam team would see that directly. But it's also not the case that our algorithms have any kind of a grudge where they would say, well, this had a manual action, they cleaned up all the problems completely, but because they had a manual action, we'll kind of demote it for a while anyway. That's not the case. It's really that they're both looking at the current situation, and algorithms sometimes have a bigger set of data to look at, but they also might not be running as frequently as maybe a manual web spam review might go through.
Okay. So just because a manual review has been revoked does not mean that it could be completely good to go.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So if the manual review is kind of okay, then that's, at least from a manual website point of view, that means we're happy there. That doesn't mean that all of our algorithms are going to say this is a fantastic website.
Okay.
John, what do you mean about this threshold that you mentioned? And so expand a bit on that.
So we try to show links in Search Console that we think are relevant to your site. It's obviously a sample of the links that we have. It's not the full set of links that we have. So that's kind of what I meant there. It's not that there's like a magic PageRank threshold or something like that, but we try to show what's relevant to the webmasters, what they might be interested in. And you see that that's kind of like a magic PageRank threshold or something like that, but we try to show what's relevant to the webmaster, what they might be interested in. And you see that, mute you guys. So you see that, for example, when you have one site that has site-wide links to your website, so if you have two websites and one of them links from every page to your other website, then you'll often see that we know of like 5 million, but we show 5. So you see that, for example, when you have one site that has 5 links to your website, then let me just mute you guys. Someone has an echo or is watching the YouTube video at the same time. So that's kind of what I was looking at there.
But is it the case that you might miss or might not display a link, any link from a single domain? So I noticed that you usually show 1, 2, 3, 5 links, even if it's site-wide, and in reality there are, I don't know, 1,000. But is it the case that you might miss entire domains? So you have 5 links from a website, but you don't show any of them?
That's possible if we don't think that they're really relevant. So it's not something that I'd say that the average webmaster would really notice, because maybe this is like a link on some site that nobody ever visits, some spammy site that kind of exists out there, but it got indexed, but it's not really something that we would say, well, people need to know about this.
Right, right. I actually had this case when I was doing the Disavow file for my penalized client, and I noticed that he gave me a list to all of the directories he submitted his site into, and noticed that a lot of them weren't in the Search Console part. So I added it to the Disavow file anyway, but just thought it was.
Yeah. So usually what I do there in a case like that is try to find the pattern. So if you know that they submitted that to directories and they used the same title or the same description, then search for that separately. So just do like normal Google searches and try to find those directories explicitly, maybe like directory and then the title that they submitted, something like that, to kind of find those as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
John, following up on that, you said that the links that you find within there that Google finds them relevant, or there's some reason for them to be in there, but surely that can be good or bad. As Mihai was saying, if you're using a Search Console to find bad links, but you're saying there are some that you should probably, if they're not in there, don't worry about them. Are you advocating using external tools then to find bad links? Surely relevant goes both ways. Relevant is good or bad.
Sure. I mean, it can make sense in some situations. I think for the most part, when webmasters are looking at things like a disavow file and kind of going through cleaning up old issues, then on the one hand, they kind of know what they were doing, or they should have known what they were doing, and can kind of guide you towards that kind of content, like with the directories in this case. And on the other hand, usually you'll find the patterns in the links in Search Console. So you'll see like there's a bunch of directory sites listed here, so maybe there are more that I could clean up as well. And finally, if they're really not listed there and it's something where you suspect there might be some other ones out there, then it might also just be that these are so small that you don't really need to worry about them. But adding them to the disavow file is basically just more work than you gain from actually cleaning that out.
Right. But if we find links within Webmaster Tools, they're relevant for something, whether that's good or bad. You can go one way or the other, surely. Because
yeah,
otherwise you can't use Webmaster Tools to clean up links.
Yeah,
because they're all positive.
We try not to do a big quality analysis before we show those links in Webmaster Tools, but sometimes we just have to categorize them like that, and like show some of these things in Webmaster Tools because we think they're relevant to the webmaster, and some of them we think, well, this is a sample that we've already shown you before, like for example the site-wide links, and that's something that you don't really need to have there. I think especially the site-wide links is one of the reasons, for example, we recommend using a domain directive in the disavow file. So instead of focusing on those individual URLs that are listed there, try to find a pattern that matches all of that and disavow that on a broader basis. I know it's not always easy, but you guys are the experts on these things, so it's good that you know a little bit about the background there, I guess, and sometimes you do have to make judgment calls and think about, well, is it worth digging even deeper into this hole of all of these tiny links that might still be out there, or is this basically just time I should better be spending on making my site even better and saying, well, at some point I have to make a cut and say I have to leave the rest of these small problems behind and focus on really creating more value on my site in general.
Right, but surely you benefit, or Google benefits, and every user benefits from you showing the ones that you either want us to work on. There's no point giving us a set of links that have no bearing whether it's good or bad. Otherwise, we're not helping to clean up the index or report bad links or just help you use disavow files for future research, etc. You're just getting junk back.
We try to show those links actually independently of disavowing and bad links, good links situations. So we try to show them because these are potential traffic sources to your site. And we had the links feature long before we had the disavow problems there or the disavow files. So it's not something that these links are provided in Search Console just so that you can clean them up. It's really for the site owner in general that these are potential traffic sources to your site. And some of these might even be no-followed. Some of them might be disavowed already. So it's more than just a web spam kind of a check for your site to look at that.
By the way, if I could give a couple of examples that I've noticed that you show and don't show. For example, I noticed you don't show, my client was building some blogspot websites, brand new, and was putting some articles with links towards them. I noticed you don't show that, which is pretty normal because those weren't existent just a day ago. So it's normal that they wouldn't even bring traffic back. But you do show some popular directories, even if it's not a good link, a natural link. You do show it because maybe it might bring some traffic back, even though it should be disavowed. Is that a good assessment?
Both of those cases probably fit. Yeah. I mean, it's really not the case that we provide this link list as a means of like cleaning up web spam issues, but rather we think that a lot of sites might want to see where they're getting linked from and where they might be getting traffic from. So that's essentially the background information there. But let's go through some of the questions that were submitted because people have been voting on those as well, and don't want to leave that out. We have this question from Barry. In the German Hangout, I am told you said the Panda refresh is coming this week or next. Or did you mean, did you still mean it can come even later than next week? So a few weeks ago, we said that this refresh would be happening in a few weeks, and so it's kind of coming up. I doubt it's going to happen this week because it's a holiday and it's Friday and people are busy doing other things, but I imagine in the next couple of weeks this is something that might be happening. So that kind of to set expectations, we try not to provide an exact date when these things roll out because things can always change in the meantime, but I expect this to happen fairly soon.
Since it will be a popular subject, are you going to do maybe a special hangout dedicated to quality content and best practices, things like that, maybe?
I'm going on vacation next week, so probably not. But maybe we can do something when I'm back to kind of look at these issues. If people have questions around that, because I think especially the blog post from Amit Singhal, which is now like 4 years back, 23 questions you can ask yourself about the quality of your content, that's still very relevant, and that's still very important to look at. Can Google crawl a hosted video and understand that the same video is hosted in more servers and published in more sites? We do try to understand when something is a duplicate and treat it appropriately. So we do that with textual content, web pages, for example. We try to recognize if something is a duplicate and filter those out when we show them in search. We do that with images where we can, and we do try to do that with video as well. So if you go and host your video on a number of different services, that doesn't necessarily mean that your video is going to show up 5 times instead of once in the search results. If you have a site like youtube.com, and under every video I put a button for the user who wants to download the videos he likes more, will this thing help me in Google search? Can Google track this kind of user action? If you make a site that works well for your users, then that's something we'll try to pick up indirectly, at least, in that people will try to recommend it more. But it's not the case that we're going to see what users do within your website, because we don't really see that at all. So from that point of view, what exactly you do on your website is really up to you. But if we see that users really love your website and they recommend it to others, then that's something we can pick up. The pop-up that's opening in another tab can ruin a site positions and search results. So this is a kind of, I guess, almost obnoxious behavior if you visit a site and it just opens up pop-ups. It's not something that I'm aware of us picking up as a quality signal or using for ranking directly. But of course, if you are kind of obnoxious towards your users, then that's something that they might reflect in how they recommend your site. So that's, again, something more indirect that we might notice, that people don't really like your site. They don't like to recommend it compared to other people's sites that they do like to recommend.
John, can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
When you track, actually it's probably more of an analytics question, although Search Console does the same now. Does when you track time on page, or the number, how long a searcher is on, on the landing page, do you track active window versus, because let's say there's lots of sites, let's say it's for cars or holidays or real estate, where you're looking down the map and you open, or I certainly do, open 10 tabs. So I want to look at that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. And then you work your way through the tabs, because that's how most people browse these days. That 10th tab I've had open for 5 minutes without actually looking at it. So how long have I actually been viewing that page according to Google? The 5 minutes or the 10 seconds I look at it and close it?
I mean, we don't use analytics data directly in search, so that's at least one thing that we wouldn't do there. In general, when we look at this kind of behavior, it's something that we look at on an aggregate level, where we'll look at it for maybe algorithm changes, where we see, well, people are generally clicking on the first result when we make this algorithm change, and people are generally clicking on the second result with this other kind of algorithm change, so maybe we're doing something wrong there. So on that level, we might look at that, but it's not something that we'd look at on a per-page level. And I imagine it's also, when you look at the broader public, they don't exhibit that behavior that you're doing there, where they're like opening everything up in tabs. That's more...
It's only for a few sites. If it's there's certain types of site, whether you're looking at properties to rent or looking at cars, or if you're trying to book a vacation and you open 10 hotels, I'm sure a lot of people do that, but it only affects certain industries, you would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, we look at this kind of data more on an aggregate level when we look at overall the algorithm changes across all types of searches. So it's not something that we'd say, well, this would affect your site if people are opening it up in a tab and looking at it later or comparing it to other tabs that they have open. So that's not something I don't think would ever really affect something there.
Right.
Does an exact match URL still boost your rankings compared to a non-exact match URL when looking at a brand new site? As far as I know, no. So on the one hand, with exact match domains, it's like so in general, that's a practice where you put the keywords for your site into the domain name and hope that your domain name ranks better because it looks like it matches those keywords. But as far as I know, that has no effect at all in search at the moment. It used to be, maybe looking back, what is it, maybe 5 years or longer, that did have some effect, but at least at the moment that has no effect at all. Is it still more important for rankings to place your keywords in the first 100 words of your content, or does that not matter anymore? I suspect that never really mattered. So we try to understand what these pages are about, and we look at the whole page if we can. There's obviously a limit to the size of the page that we can download, but I think that's around like 10 megabytes. So if you have your content within those 10 megabytes, then we'll be able to recognize that and show that in search. We're using parameters for campaign tracking, like question mark UTM source, etc. Is a duplicate content if parameters on each site are unique, but the content is the same. So technically, that would be duplicate content in the sense that you have different URLs with these different parameters leading to the same content. In practice, that's not a problem, though. So on the one hand, we recognize that this is exactly the same content, and we can filter it out even before we index those pages. On the other hand, if we do manage to index those pages separately, for example, if there's like a date or a timer on the page or the sidebar that's dynamic, then we'll try to filter those out when we show them to the user. So that's not something I'd really worry about there. The other aspect is if we find those parameters just within your normal analytics code, for example, then that's something we'll try to filter out on our side anyway. We'll try to recognize that. If we find those parameters in normal links within your website or external links to those pages, then we might try to crawl and index those pages like that. But you can block that by using the URL parameter handling tool to let us know that these parameters are actually totally irrelevant. And chances are, if you use analytics anyway with these parameters already, that when you go to Search Console to the URL parameter handling tool, it'll already say, we've recognized these parameters, and these probably aren't that relevant for your site. Does using keyword in the domain, is that still bad for SEO? Will I get an EMD penalty for using the keyword in the domain name? As I mentioned before, that's not really something I'd worry about here. With regards to the EMD penalty that was mentioned there, this is something that we mentioned a while back where we've seen a lot of sites use exact match domains with really low quality content. And really the combination of having really low quality content on these exact match domains is what the problem is for us. It's not so much that your keywords happen to be in your URL, because a lot of sites have keywords in the URL. A lot of brands have their brand name in the URL, which kind of makes sense. And just because that matches what people are searching for doesn't mean that it's automatically bad.
So can I touch base on that?
Sure.
So basically what you're saying is if somebody owns, like, example, tools.com, if you have crap content, then yeah, you might be looked at and maybe kind of pushed to the back a little bit. But if you own tools.com and you have good information about tools, quality content, user interaction, then having the tools.com will actually help you rank a bit better because you have the EMD. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not that you would rank better because of that exact match domain, but it wouldn't cause any problems for your site.
Okay.
So just because you have a great site and the keywords for your site happen to be in the domain name doesn't mean that we're going to penalize their site.
So EMD has nothing to do with ranking at all anymore.
No, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we've seen this a lot in situations where someone will go off and buy like green tools, brown tools, yellow tools, garden tools, cartools.com, all these different domain variations, and essentially put the same content up. And that's something that we were trying to target with that specific update. So if these are really just like doorway sites, essentially with low quality content, then that's something that we might take action on. Anchor text of internal links that are not a part of the navigation bar. Does the text matter? If the same text is used too often, is it penalized? No, that's absolutely no problem. You can link within your site however you want. The bigger issue that we sometimes see is that people try to use this as a way to kind of create a sitemap page within their content, where they'll have their main content on top, and on the bottom they have this big chunk of text with keyword-rich anchor text links to individual parts of the site. And it's not so much that these links would be unnatural, it's just that it looks like keyword stuffing. So we look at that page and we find this big chunk of text on the bottom with just keyword, 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 and that looks like keyword stuffing, and our algorithms might look at that and say, well, I don't know if I can trust this page. So it's not that those links are not natural, but it's just that you've stuffed it with so much text that we don't really know what's actually relevant on these pages. If you 301 redirect HTTP to HTTPS, will there be a slight drop in ranking similar to what happens when you move from one site to another? Not really. So this is not something that you would see in practice or where you would see any kind of a drop. So we try to treat HTTP and HTTPS sites as similar as possible. And if you move from one version to another, then we'll try to just forward all of the signals that we have there. What's the quickest way to get Google to read a disavow? Do you have any tips on structure or content of the disavow? Should there be more or less detail? So we read the disavow file right when you submit it. There is nothing special that you need to do there. What I would recommend doing, though, is using the domain directive as much as possible. So instead of listing individual URLs, try to list the whole domain. That saves you a bit of time because you don't have to chase all of those individual URLs, and also makes it easier for us to process it because we don't have to match all of these individual URLs. So that's maybe a tip to watch out for. Past that, it's really up to you. You can leave comments in a disavow file if they help you, but we don't read them at all. So these files are processed by our systems automatically. If there's a comment in there that you want to give Google, then the disavow file is probably a bad place to leave that. Googlebot found an extremely high number of URLs. I think we talked about this briefly before. When using a CDN for speed, none of our images show up indexed, even though we have set up the rel canonical. So I guess there are two aspects with regards to images that are kind of relevant that you'd want to watch out for. On the one hand, you need to make sure that your web pages point to the images directly as much as possible. On the other hand, we tend not to recrawl images as quickly as web pages because usually they don't change and usually they're pretty big. So what happens is if you change the URLs of your images, then it takes a lot longer for us to actually find them. So as much as possible, really try to keep the URLs of your images as the same as long as possible. That means if you're using a CDN, try to maybe use the same URLs as you had before, if that's possible. If you're moving from one host name to another, then just keep in mind that it takes a lot longer for us to process that when it comes to images. So definitely make sure you don't have any kind of session parameters in the image URLs. Really try to make sure that the images URLs that you have specified on the web pages match exactly the ones that you use for hosting the content and that you would want to have indexed. We also don't use rel canonical on images directly, so you really need to either redirect those image URLs if you're moving from one site to another, or at least make sure that the web pages really point at the actual image URLs. Another aspect we've sometimes seen is that people will set up a CDN that's kind of like a round-robin setup where you have different host names, where the image are kind of sharded across different servers. And if you do that, just make sure that you're always pointing at the same host name for each image, so that it doesn't happen that we crawl the web page and we see one link to version A. The next time we crawl that page, there's a link to version B. The next time we crawl it to version C. But instead, really make sure that the URL you use for the image is as static as possible and that it stays the same.
Well, what we did is, we were trying to get every page to load under 2 seconds, and the only way that we accomplished that with a 2 megabyte page was to use a max CDN service. So we set that up like almost a year ago now, and none of the images are still showing in the Google Webmaster Tools area, and it's been about a year that that's been set up, and we haven't made any changes whatsoever. Other than that, but the CDN itself, we made it to where it's CDN, .oursite.com, and then of course the string, and that's what we've done.
Is it crawlable? Is there like a robots text in place?
They actually said for us to use the no index, no follow that they offer, because you don't want to run into duplicate content issues. So should we actually take that no index, no follow robots off of there so that it, because I can see what you're saying, it's not getting indexed because the robots on that CDN is saying don't index this.
Yeah.
So maybe try taking the index off. We just didn't want to get in trouble for duplicate content. You know what I mean?
I wouldn't worry about duplicate content there, because if we recognize it's exactly the same as we've already seen, that's a technical problem for us, that we just try to fold those versions together and treat them as one. But if we don't have any version at all, then
it's just nothing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd definitely look at that, and maybe what I'd also double check is in Search Console, in Fetches Google, you can look at the rendered view of a page. Really make sure that in the rendered view the images also show up, so that it's really kind of like a check to see that Googlebot can actually access those images, and if there's no index in the way, then actually we should be able to index those too.
Okay.
John, regarding fetch and render, there was actually a product forum thread about somebody asking that if he uses jQuery to generate a rel canonical tag, I think that was, but it doesn't show up in the code when he does the fetch and render process. And, well, the rendered image wouldn't show anything else because it's in the head portion of the HTML code. Does that mean that Google doesn't process it, or?
It's tricky. If you're doing something like that with JavaScript, then chances are we'll pick it up, but it's not guaranteed. So if, for example, for any reason we can't process the JavaScript file, then we'd crawl the page without the rel canonical. The same thing happens if you use JavaScript to add a no index, for example. So it's a situation where I imagine most of the time we'll get it right, because we'll be able to render these pages with JavaScript and see that JavaScript adds a rel canonical or a no index to the head, and we can use that. But if for whatever reason we can't process the JavaScript file, then we'd have that version without that extra metadata. And if that's a problem, then you might want to kind of prepare for that and just have some kind of a fail-safe within the HTML.
And one more thing regarding that. So the code that is displayed in the fetch and render result is before you render the JavaScript and the image is after, or because that person was never seeing the rel canonical tag in the code?
Yeah, so with the fetch and render, we show the screenshot of the rendered version, and we show the HTML source that we actually downloaded. So you wouldn't see if there's a rel canonical that we would render with JavaScript. I guess one thing you could do is set up a test page that inserts the rel canonical, and then uses JavaScript to try to read that out and display it in the big text so that you can see it in the screenshot. But usually we have no problem finding that kind of rel canonical when it's generated with JavaScript.
Yeah, that was my suggestion. Thanks.
All right. We're currently receiving a large amount of referral traffic from spammy domains. Will this analytics data affect our rankings? Would you suggest blocking these domains in htaccess or just filtering in analytics? So I can't speak for the analytics team directly. I know they're aware of this problem and they're working on resolving that. One of the things to think about there is a lot of the spammy traffic that I've seen, at least with my sites, is from sites that haven't actually visited my website. So it'll look like referral traffic and analytics, but it's not actually from someone who visited the site. So by using htaccess to block them on my server, that wouldn't necessarily block that from appearing in analytics. So you might want to kind of double check that before you spend a lot of time working out an htaccess file. There are ways that you can filter this data in analytics, though, so that's something you might want to look into. I've seen a lot of blog posts that have the instructions on how to set that up. How much does silo structure affect rankings for e-commerce sites? I don't really understand that question. I guess that's about the URL structure within e-commerce site, where you kind of have a complicated structure sometimes. From our point of view, how you set up the URL is essentially up to you. It's not something that we'd say you need to do it like this or like that. Some people use path. Some people use like dashes in between different parts of the URL. Some people just use the IDs that come directly from the database, and all of that works for us. What's important for us is that we can actually crawl your website and kind of go from one URL to the other to find all of that content. And ideally, that we understand some kind of a structure when we crawl the website, so that we see this is the main page, this is a category page, there are lots of detail pages here. Maybe some of these detail pages are related to each other and they have cross-links. All of that helps. What doesn't work for us so well is if you just have one home page and it has a search box in it, and none of your content is actually linked from those pages. So if we have to make up random search keywords to try to search through your website to find those pages, that's going to be very tricky. But if you have a clear URL structure that we can click through and follow through to your pages, that's perfectly fine. How you structure the URLs themselves, if you use different path elements or all one word with dashes, that's really up to you.
John, if I may, I think the question mainly refers about segmenting your site into separate topics, and the topics themselves don't really link from one another. So that's siloing. Like you have TVs section and gardening products, and those two don't really link to one another, thereby separating them.
That's fine. That's fine too. I mean, if we can recognize those individual parts of your site, that's perfectly fine. A lot of people have this structure naturally, and they use maybe different CMS systems on the same domain. Maybe they have an e-commerce site and a blog, and they're kind of different CMS systems, so they don't cross-link by default, and that works too. As long as we can really crawl from any place within the website to discover the rest of the website, then that should work for us. If a person takes a hot link from my video or photo that I host on my website and publishes it in his website, is that counted by Google as a backlink for me? I don't think we count that as links directly, but it does help us to understand the images better and to figure out how we should be showing these in image search. As you confirmed in the German Hangout, that Panda update is coming. Is this just for German or for all languages? These updates try to be as general as possible so that they be for all languages. How to implement site link search with a Smartie template. I tried using literal, but it's not working. you probably want to talk with someone who has experience with working with this kind of templating language. So that's possibly not something that you'd find help for in the Google Webmaster Help forums, because you really need to have someone who knows that templating language and can give you some tips there.
Actually, I used Smartie to implement that, and I didn't have any issues with it. So.
Okay, so talk to Mihai. Ha, you just volunteered, sorry. In regards to 404 pages, how long does Google keep these 404 URLs in Google's index before they get removed? Even if it's removed, can we use 301 to get those pages back to the index? We do try to remove them as quickly as possible. With 404 pages, we might check the URLs maybe once or twice or 3 times just to make sure that it's really gone before we actually drop it completely from the index. But there's no fixed time frame where we would say after 1 week it'll happen, because sometimes after 1 week we wouldn't have even crawled that URL once. So it really depends a lot on the site and how we crawl that. Can a drop-down navigational menu affect my site's crawling, indexing, and ranking? Sure, theoretically. So with a drop-down navigation menu, just like any other kind of navigation, it helps us to understand the site structure and to kind of follow through and find links to the individual parts of the site. And if you don't have links to the rest of your site, to the rest of the site structure, that makes it really hard for us to actually pick up and figure out what we should be showing here. So if you have a navigation menu that leads to all the parts of your site, that's perfectly fine. If that's a drop-down navigational menu or like a sidebar or whatever else, that doesn't really matter so much as long as we can crawl them. Sometimes what's tricky is that you'll use a JavaScript widget for this navigation, and if the JavaScript is blocked by robots text, then we won't be able to see that menu at all. Then we'll just see that you're crawling some JavaScript file. We don't know what's in that JavaScript file, so we can't use that to crawl the rest of your site. But if this is a navigation menu that we can pick up for crawling, then we'll try to use that to crawl the rest of the site. For new websites that are just beginning the SEO process, is it better to launch the website even when it's not 100% optimized and finished, or really make a complete site that's full and optimized with meta tags, alt titles, etc. before launching? I think this is kind of up to you. It's not the case that we would count it against the website if they don't have meta tags or clean titles on their pages. We try to look at that every time we crawl those pages and take that into account. And if you want to launch now and you know that your site isn't 100% perfect, but you think people are just waiting for it and kind of eager to look at your site and to recommend it to others, and maybe launching a slightly incomplete site makes sense. On the other hand, if you want to make sure that everything is 100% perfect before you launch, then maybe waiting until you're satisfied with the state makes sense. So it's really up to you.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
This is something that is like everybody talks about this all the time, about new site versus old site. Does that matter? I mean, if I have a site that's 20 years old with the same link, same content as a site that's a month old, same link, same content, does it matter if my site's 20 years old versus a site that's a month old? Just because it's asked everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very theoretical question, because if your site is 20 years old, then chances are it has a lot more history than something that's maybe a month old. So like saying that they're kind of exactly the same with regards to links, for example, that's usually not the case. But it's definitely not the case that there is any kind of an old site bonus where we'd say, well, this domain has been up for 10 years, therefore it should receive a ranking boost. That's not the case.
So all things equal, the age doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter. No.
Okay.
And I guess one aspect might come into play is if it's a really new site, then we don't really have any good signals for that site yet. Mm-hmm. So it takes a while to understand that this is a site that has good signals, where we see people are recommending it. It looks like something we should show in search. But if you're talking about something that's maybe a month old, then that gives us time to look at how that's shown, how we should show that in search.
Okay.
So that's kind of comparing a site that's 1 day old to something that's 20 years old is really hard. But once you're past like a month or something, then we kind of understand how the site should be shown in search.
Okay.
Let's see. Can I include canonical URLs in sitemaps for SEO? For example, url.htm is a duplicate of example2.com. I use this tag in the sitemap. I recommend trying to do that on the pages themselves or in the HTTP header instead of doing it in the sitemap. I don't think it's directly possible in the sitemap file, but I might be wrong there. I think with mobile pages, for example, we do have the option of having the link rel alternate in the sitemap file, but I'd really try to keep that in the HTML as much as possible, the canonical. In Search Console, I recently received a message, add app property or you'll miss error reports, but I've already added the app index, app property, and reports come there. Is this message just a notification? Yes, this is essentially notification. So to kind of back up a little bit, we recently added the ability to add Android apps directly to Search Console so that if your app is indexed for search using the app indexing API, then we can show you information directly there if you have that app verified in Search Console. In the past, if we recognized that your app belongs to a website, then we would have shown your app information on the website in Search Console, or rather within the messages that we sent to the website in Search Console. So it's kind of, I think, maybe a month or two ago, we added that ability. So if you have an app that you're using app indexing for, make sure you have it verified separately in Search Console so that you actually get this information about the clicks and impressions, any crawl errors that we might have for the app, all of that. Is app indexing for app-only content already reflected in the search results at Google I/O? Scott Huffman said that some of this would finish in a few weeks. I don't believe it's live yet in search. So app-only indexing means you have an app that has content, and we try to show that in search results so that if someone is searching for your content, we can recommend to them, if they're on a smartphone that kind of allows for this app, then we can recommend that to those users directly in search. But I don't think that's live just yet. I know they're working on some of the issues there to kind of make that easier. It's always a bit trickier if you have an app with content in it that doesn't have an associated website, because then we really have to kind of crawl through that app to actually get all of that content. And that's definitely not as easy as crawling HTML pages. All right. We don't really have time, but I have a bit more time. So if any of you have any questions, if you want to hang around a bit, let's chat.
John, this is actually regarding one of the questions left, and I've noticed this in Romania as well. There are some sites that hide the content behind a paywall, but do allow Google to actually crawl the content that would be otherwise accessible only if you pay. And so that content is crawled, and when you search in Google, you see the result, and you see the meta description containing those keywords that you search. But when you actually access the website, you don't see any of that because they ask you to get a subscription. And that's not one of the most friendliest of user experiences.
Yeah, we classify that as cloaking. So you're showing users something completely different than what you're showing Google, and that might be something that the web spam team would take action on if you submit a web spam report. It's always, I guess, a kind of a tricky situation there. What we usually recommend for sites that do want to have kind of a paywall or kind of a sign-up flow is to look at the first click free setup, where users going from search directly have a first couple of clicks free to actually see the content, and then they're confronted with the paywall or the login page.
Okay. So I could submit a web design report or a feedback thingy.
Sure, yeah.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Okay, one is we, as you know, I'm in the celebrity niche stuff, but we had another blog that we were doing about, celebrities, what's going on in the news and all that kind of stuff. And then we have another site that we do, but found that we didn't have enough time to continue doing both. So both celebrity related. So it's okay to 301 redirect the celebrity site that we were doing before to our main one because we want to focus on the main one instead of trying to separate both and put up crappy content versus one site with good content.
Yeah, then
That's
I think
okay.
that makes sense. If you can do it in a way that the new content is equivalent to the old content, that's perfectly fine. If you can do it in a way
close. It's close.
Close,
I mean,
yeah. I mean, if you can find something like a page-by-page matching and do the redirects like that, that would be totally awesome, and that would be absolutely no problem at all. If this is the case that you're kind of folding one side into the other and it's essentially the same target audience, then even just doing a site-wide redirect like that to maybe the home page is also an option.
Okay, that's what we did. We just did that HTTXS. Okay, and then my other question is that you mentioned that site-wide links can be bad. What about same scenario? Another person like TMZ is linking to us in their sidebar, but that gives us a site-wide link. But we don't really want to disavow TMZ because that's I mean they're a strong company. So are you talking about the site links that can hurt you as like, I'm a celebrities blog, and this is a blog about gnomes?
No, I mean, site-wide links aren't necessarily bad. And in a case like that, that's perfectly fine situation where you say, well, this website is linking to my website from all its pages. That's a fantastic endorsement, I think. That's not something you'd need to block. It's just that we wouldn't show all of those individual links in Search Console separately. So if TMZ is linking to your website, you'll probably see a handful of links from TMZ in Search Console, but you won't see all of the individual URLs from TMZ that are linking to your pages.
Okay.
So it's not that they're bad, it's just that we don't show all of them because we think the sample kind of gives you enough information already.
Okay. Okay.
All right. One last question from anyone?
John, I'll ask, but I don't know if you'll answer, if there's been any update change in our original issue from 2 years ago.
I'd have to take a look.
I couldn't wait.
I thought we looked last time, right?
No, you looked at the new site because we'd moved completely, but we still have a 10-year-old domain that had that original mystery underlying problem. That's
the one without the E, right?
Yeah. And if it'll ever lift, because we don't want to close it, because it's got 10 years of history, that if it comes back, we can then 301 to the new one and should theoretically get that boost back.
At least for the moment, I continue working on the new site.
Right. Then there's nothing more you can give us in terms of, because it was a mystery problem, so I don't know if that's something that you needed time to work out and whether it's been enough time. It was 2 years.
I'd have to check with the team what's happening there. At least for the moment, it looks like it's still affected by this.
Right. And this is affected by what?
By the
The thing.
algorithms that are in effect there. Yeah. Sorry.
All right. If you wouldn't mind just asking again,
Yeah, I'll check.
I'll drop you a Google Plus reminder as if
Okay.
you need one.
All right. Mihai.
Yeah, this is actually for one of the other product forums thread that I couldn't find an answer to. This is a URL-specific issue. I've noticed that if you use a site query on that URL, it shows that the URL is indexed. But if you're searching for in title, the title of the page, or all in title, it doesn't show any results. And the person was complaining that whenever he's searching for that specific title, his page isn't showing the results. It's actually showing another page of his website that links to that page, and that's not very user-friendly for the searcher. It's a really interesting issue because it looks like it's indexed, but it's not indexed. So
it looks like it's indexed normally, actually. So
why wouldn't it show up with in title or all in title?
I don't know. I haven't used those queries in a really long time, so I don't really know what we're looking at there. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the cache page, you can see that it's actually there. So from that point of view, it's not something where I'd say it's not indexed. We're essentially picking that up, yeah. But I'd have to check what the title shows there. It's
even if you search for the quote title quote, it shows up a different page of his website that links to that page instead of actually showing the page itself.
okay.
Found it pretty weird.
Okay. I don't know. I'd have to take a look or maybe talk with the team about that.
By the way,
Interesting mystery.
If it shows for the site query, should it also show for the in URL query? Because it doesn't.
They're slightly different, and the way they're processed internally is very different. So it can happen that it shows up in one and not in the other. What I usually do is either an info query or a cache query to see which URL is actually indexed. Because sometimes what will happen is we have www, non-www, and we show it with the site query, but we don't show it with the cache query. Or in the cache query, you'll see the different URL there. So that's something I sometimes use to kind of double check: is this really this specific URL actually indexed?
Okay. Well, I left you on Google Plus the forum threads. If you can.
Okay. I'll take a look. That's a weird mystery in that case. Okay. All right. So we've kind of come to the end here. I'll be setting up the next Hangout, but next time I think I'm on vacation, so it'll probably be in 3 weeks, something like that.
That's sad.
Yeah, I mean, things will go on. Don't worry. All right. So thank you all for joining. Thanks for submitting so many questions, and hopefully we'll see each other again in one of the future Hangouts.
Have a good vacation.
Have a nice vacation, John.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sean.
Bye, everyone.
All right. See ya.